We're going to take you now to Nancy Pelosi. Let's listen in.
Day, the Intelligence Community Inspector General formally notified the Congress that the administration was forbidding him from turning over a whistleblower complaint on Constitution Day. This is a violation of law. Shortly thereafter, press reports began to break of a phone call by the President of the United States calling upon a foreign power to intervene in his election. This is a breach of his constitutional responsibilities. The facts are these. The Intelligence Community Inspector General, who was appointed by President Trump, determined that the complaint is both of urgent concern and credible. And its disclosure, he went on to say, relates to one of the most significant and important of the Director of National Intelligence's responsibility to the American people. On Thursday, the Inspector General testified before the House Intelligence Committee, stating that the acting Director of National Intelligence blocked him from disclosing the whistleblower complaint. This is a violation of law. The law is unequivocal. The DNI staff, it says the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, shall provide Congress the full whistleblower complaint. For more than 25 years, I've served on the Intelligence Committee as a member, as the ranking member, as part of the Gang of Four, even before I was in the leadership. I was there when we created the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That did not exist before 2004. I was there even earlier in the 90s when we wrote the whistleblower laws and continue to write them to improve them to ensure the security of our intelligence and the safety of our whistleblowers. I know what their purpose was, and we proceeded with balance and caution as we wrote the laws. I can say with authority the Trump administration's actions undermine both our national security and our intelligence and our protections of the whistleblowers, more than both. This Thursday, the acting DNI will appear before the House Intelligence Committee. At that time, he must turn over the whistleblower's full complaint to the committee. He will have to choose whether to break the law or honor his responsibility to the Constitution. On the final day of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, when our Constitution was adopted, Americans gathered on the steps of Independence Hall to await the news of the government our founders had crafted. They asked Benjamin Franklin, "What do we have, a republic or a monarchy?" Franklin replied, "A republic if you can keep it." Our responsibility is to keep it. Our republic endures because of the wisdom of our Constitution, enshrined in three co-equal branches of government serving as checks and balances on each other. The actions taken to date by the President have seriously violated the Constitution, especially when the President says, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. For the past several months, we have been investigating in our committees and litigating in the courts, so the House can gather all the relevant facts and consider whether to exercise its full Article 1 powers, including a constitutional power of the utmost gravity, approval of articles of impeachment. And this week, the President has admitted to asking the President of Ukraine to take actions which would benefit him politically. The actions of the Trump presidency revealed the dishonorable fact of the President's betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. I'm directing our 6 committees to proceed with their investigations under that umbrella of impeachment inquiry. The President must be held accountable. No one is above the law. Getting back to our founders, in the darkest days of the American Revolution, Thomas Paine wrote, "The times have found us. The times found them to fight for and establish our democracy. The times have found us today, not to place ourselves in the same category of greatness as our founders, but to place us in the urgency of protecting and defending our Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. in the words of Ben Franklin, to keep our republic. I thank our chairman, Chairman Nadler, Chairman Nadler of Judiciary, Chairman Schiff of Intelligence, Chairman Engel of Foreign Affairs, Chairman Cummings of Oversight, and Chairman Cummings I've been in touch with constantly. He's a master of so much, but including inspectors general and whistleblowers. Congresswoman Richie Neal of the Ways and Means Committee, Congresswoman Maxine Waters of the Foreign Financial Services Committee. And I commend all of our members, our colleagues, for their thoughtful approach to all of this, for their careful statements. God bless them, and God bless America. Thank you all.
Madam Speaker, never before has the President...
And we have just heard Speaker Nancy Pelosi announcing a formal impeachment inquiry into President Trump. We're now going to bring in our panel, Major Garrett, Molly Hooper, and Keir Dougal. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Major Garrett is the chief Washington correspondent for CBS News. Molly is a CBSN political contributor, and Keir Dougal is with me here on set. He's a CBSN legal contributor and former assistant U.S. attorney for New York's Eastern District. Major, let me start with you. Now that we know that there will be a formal impeachment inquiry, can you lay out for us exactly how the impeachment process works?
Well, as Speaker Pelosi just said, the 6 committees already investigating matters that they believe might constitute high crimes and misdemeanors. Remember, that's the constitutional standard for impeachment. Will continue their work under the umbrella of an impeachment inquiry. Now, if Congress decides to actually have a vote to place that official umbrella term legislatively over those 6 committees, that will invest the House majority with more power to carry out some of the legal wrangling it's carried out with this administration. In other words, enforcing subpoenas that the administration has ignored or fought in court. But essentially what the Speaker has laid out is a process that goes forward largely as it has been going on so far, with this one added detail, which she mentioned and referred to repeatedly in her prepared remarks, that this particular newest encounter of the House Democrats with this administration over the Director of National Intelligence Inspector General's refusal to provide the whistleblower account to Congress is, in the Speaker's words, a violation of law. And that lawlessness, she said, is what is now brought this to a tipping point and change the underlying politics in the House Democratic caucus writ large, and most specifically change the politics for the Speaker, who has been, if anything, a publicly reluctant voice along the road of impeachment inquiry. She is no longer reluctant. She's now putting the full weight of the speakership behind that, and it is worth pointing out, writ large, the entire Democratic Party.
Right. All right, Keir, I want to turn to you now. If we can talk about what constitutes an impeachable offense as relates to this phone call, it seems to me there are two things that are being investigated. Number one, whether there was a quid pro quo, which is something the president denies there was. Number two, whether he was asking a foreign leader to investigate a political rival, which is something the president actually admits to doing. He says there was a reason for that, but he admits to doing that. Which of those two things is worse in the eyes of the law?
So the Constitution talks about treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors as what is an impeachable offense for which the president can be removed from office. The phrase high crimes and misdemeanors we've all heard before, and it is something with a very broad definition. It's really imported from English common law by the founders at the time that the Constitution was adopted. And what that really means at the core of it, it means abuse of office in a way that hurts the public. Mm-hmm. And so the question really becomes, I think, in these circumstances, is the president using his office for personal political gain in an improper and corrupt way? And so the notion that, and Nancy Pelosi just mentioned it, the notion that the president would seek assistance from a foreign nation to get himself reelected is very problematic. The Constitution and the removal provisions in the Constitution, they're sort of quasi-political and quasi-legal. So when we talk about a quid pro quo, you're sort of leading into questions about a bribery. And as I think we've seen with the Mueller investigation, the framers didn't necessarily make an impeachable offense something that depended on a crime, on the existence of a crime. It's a political offense. And for some of this conduct, I think it would be very difficult, or there may be defenses to trying to fit President Trump's conduct into either an extortion or a bribery or a campaign finance violation. But really, it's a political question.
All right, I just want to interrupt for a second to point out that the president has tweeted, not surprisingly, in response to Nancy Pelosi. He is here in New York at the UN, and he tweeted saying, "Such an important day at the United Nations, so much work and so much success, and the Democrats purposely had to ruin and demean it with more breaking news witch hunt garbage. So bad for our country." I suppose not surprising that he would have a rapid Twitter response. So no president has ever been removed through impeachment. Molly, what do you expect to happen next?
Well, what's going to happen next is a little unclear, given that traditionally the House Judiciary Committee takes up the impeachment inquiry, so to speak, and conducts the investigation, subpoenas witnesses, holds hearings, and then marks up essentially the charges, the articles of impeachment that then are referred back or recommended back to the House floor, after which the House would vote on each individual article of impeachment, essentially a charge, what the individual's charged with. And given that Pelosi is saying that all 6 committees are going to continue down the same path that they're on, essentially, it's really unclear how they're going to conduct or move forward with impeachable offenses or articles of impeachment, which is ultimately what an impeachment inquiry culminates in. And so I think that there will be, and from what I understand among Democrats, is there's a bit of a turf war, because House Judiciary Committee, like I said, traditionally has taken this role, the lead in the past. But there's been some disagreement between the way that Jerry Nadler, as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has handled impeachment-related hearings, like the one last week with Corey Lewandowski, and the way that Nancy Pelosi would have liked that to have gone. And so, again, I think that those committee chairs are going to look for a little bit more direction. But as to the timeline and when we would see articles of impeachment, it's just unclear.
Major, I want to ask you, according to the president, the transcript of the call will be released tomorrow.
Right.
What can we expect to come out of that, and what kind of defense can we expect the president to mount?
Okay, that's very tricky territory in the what can we expect world, because I've never witnessed that before. I mean, we say this with some frequency, and just because we say it with some frequency doesn't mean it's true, and doesn't mean we ought not to pause and say to ourselves and take maybe kind of a slightly deep breath and say, we really haven't seen this before. So we have an allegation before the entire country that a president of the United States might have used the strong arm of the American presidency to gather potentially helpful political dirt on an emerging political rival with a foreign country. That's a pretty heavy accusation. Then we have the president say, no, I didn't do any of those things. You're all jumping to conclusions. You're all believing the worst about me. And to prove it, I'm going to give you a transcript of my private conversation with a newly elected foreign leader. I know of no modern precedent for either the accusation or the transcript emerging in public. So when you say, what should we expect? I don't have the foggiest idea what we should expect, except what maybe the president has indicated, a conversation full of praiseworthy comments from the president, receiving them in a praiseworthy fashion from the Ukrainian president, newly elected, and then a lot of things that people on both sides of the aisle may read differently. I think it's important today, just hours before this conversation and her appearance before the cameras, Nancy Pelosi said, and we ran the soundbite briefly, there doesn't need to be an obvious quid pro quo in that phone conversation transcript for this to be a transgression of our institutional understanding of the powers of the presidency and how they should be used. That's her conclusion. I am relatively confident most Republicans are yet to embrace that conclusion. They may look at the transcript and says, looks fine to me, says what the president said. This is just another Democratic overreaction, a politicization of the process of what this president is or what he has been or what he's alleged to have done, and they may leave it alone. until we see the transcript, we can't know. But that the president is releasing it and has ignored some of his advisors who said, look, whatever the contents of that call, Mr. President, however honest you think it makes you look, it's a bad precedent for the institution of the presidency, and you ought not to do it.
Right.
Well, it's clear this president is not as interested in the precedents of the presidency as he is in his own narrative. And he's going to advance his narrative as he's described it tomorrow.
And you know, one thing that we can't lose sight of, and I'm sure that no lawmakers are losing sight of, is regardless of what the president did or didn't do, regardless of whether or not he, you know, violated his office, this is a political process and it comes down to votes, essentially. So let's discuss the lawmakers we know who have come out in support of impeachment. By our count, at least 170 Democrats are in favor of an inquiry opening. So, Molly, is this a make-or-break issue for Democratic lawmakers, especially those moderates who've stayed out of the impeachment fray thus far?
Well, I think what we need to do is look to those 7 House Democrats, the freshmen who won in Trump majority districts this last election in 2018, who wrote an op-ed that was published in the Washington Post today. These Democrats, Allison Spanberger, former CIA analyst, Alyssa Slotkin, same thing, former CIA, and we have military veterans who also joined on this, and they were particularly concerned about the Ukraine call, and again, the perception and the appearance of abuse of power. Going to Major's point, the president using the strong, you know, this sort of strong arming another country by using the fact that he's the president of the United States. You don't necessarily need to explicitly ask for, you know, a quid pro quo, but the fact that, say, I'm the president of the United States and I'm calling and saying, hey, we have this military aid for you, but you know, how's that inquiry into Joe Biden going? And you know, for the other country to pick up what he's putting down, if you know what I'm saying. And those Democrats, those moderates, are particularly concerned by that abuse of power. And again, I think that there needs to be a little bit more clarity in how these 6 committees are going to proceed, because again, just because they're investigating and holding hearings, we don't know what the specific charges are that would come to the House floor, and the members will vote on each specific charge. One may be related to obstruction of justice. The other may be related to this Ukrainian phone call. It really depends, and I think that you'll see more Democrats in favor of an article of impeachment that is related to this perceived abuse of power on the Ukrainian issue.
All right, Molly Hooper, thank you so much for that. We know you have to dash, so thank you for joining us. We'll let you go now. Major, I'm going to turn to you now. Will this be a test of Republicans at this point, those who will support the president through thick or thin, or those who may see the writing on the wall?
It is a test, and so far I detect no particular wobbling among House or Senate Republicans. There might have been some detectable at the very, very thinnest margins when the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell today did not offer any stout defense of the president, but only said in questioning put to him by our colleague Nancy Cordes that he inquired several times about this Ukrainian assistance passed by Congress, signed by the president, that was being held up for what he described as unknown reasons. He kept asking, why is this aid, this lethal military aid, being held up? And he never got a response. That's all he would say today. He didn't condemn the president, but he didn't suggest there was nothing there, and this was a matter that had been resolved to his satisfaction. Is that an insight into some level of discomfort that the Senate Majority Leader may possess? Could that be reflective of discomfort that Republicans are feeling but not yet publicly expressing? I would only say about that, stay tuned. One thing I would observe, with this release of the transcript tomorrow, there will be I guarantee you, declaration from the White House of maximum transparency. But really, that's not at the heart of this matter. What's at the heart of this matter, and what the Speaker of the House just referred to, is the whistleblower account and the Inspector General's summary thereof. And we have been told, and reporting on this suggests, that whistleblower and the Inspector General, looking at that information, saying this looks very serious to me and falls within the ambit of the law, which means I need to do something with it, was not only about Ukraine, but other matters as well. So will that ever surface? And if it doesn't surface, you might have the White House saying, hey, we were transparent on the thing you were all concerned about, but we're not on the other thing. But the other thing might be the real matter.
Good point, though, Major. To follow up on that, there were leaks, right? We sort of learned more and more about this Ukraine call through some leaks. So is it possible that we can learn more about what you just brought up through some leaks?
Hope springs eternal on the leak front, I will tell you that, and always has here in Washington and always will. And that is something that we have been notified again, because this happens so often in our current atmosphere on Twitter, not any other way, but the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff said it appears that this whistleblower is moving closer toward a testimony of some kind. The Senate Intelligence Committee, on a bipartisan basis, is moving toward getting to these underlying facts of what alarmed the whistleblower in the first place, and what the Inspector General thought was, if not equally alarming, sufficiently alarming to raise concerns.
Let me ask you
Once we
something,
get to
Major.
those underlying details, we may know about importantly, what this is and what it isn't.
But what's to stop this whistleblower from going to Congress himself, defying the Director of National Intelligence and just saying, I feel so strongly about this information, I'm releasing it to Congress regardless of, my superiors?
Every whistleblower wants, if there's a process, to follow the process of the law. Why? To avoid the accusation that you're a whistleblower in essentially partisan clothing, and that's why you're motivated. You're not whistleblowing to save the country or to live up to the law. You're just ratting somebody out because you've got a policy disagreement or a partisan disagreement. So whistleblowers, the general tendency is, and certainly if they ever obtain legal counsel, the legal counsel is always the same. Follow the process. Trust in the process and follow it. And that's what we are led to believe the whistleblower has done. Moving outside of that process invites all sorts of other criticism that at this moment, and I'm not predicting anything going forward, but at this moment, the whistleblower, whoever he or she is not comfortable with.
So, Keir, speaking from a legal perspective, is that correct? The whistleblower should just hold tight and wait and see where the process takes he or she?
Well, Major is certainly correct that holding tight will provide the whistleblower with the maximum amount of protection. If you step outside that process, you're potentially violating the secrecy laws. You potentially could lose your job. These things are important to this individual, he or she, whoever they may be. So to the extent that they can put together a process that's within the guardrails, they're certainly going to want to try to do that. Just to follow up on what Major said earlier, though, about the transparency, one thing that I would want to keep my eye on is this transcript that we're hearing described. Theoretically, that's a written summary of something else. And so the question that I have is there a tape? Do the Ukrainians have a tape of this conversation? Does the White House have a tape of this conversation?
In other words, the mention that happened 8 times may not happen 8 times in the transcript.
Correct.
That allegedly happened 8 times.
There are a couple of issues. As a former prosecutor, I can tell you a couple of issues. I don't want the transcript. I want the recording. And the reason why I want the recording is because of all the nuance, all the inflection,
the pauses.
Is somebody yelling? Is somebody being sarcastic? Molly got at it. Is it an understanding that you can gather from the recording that you can't get from the flat text? And so, when Major talked about transparency, I would really, if I was going to claim transparency, I would want to release all of this stuff. And finally,
good point, though. Major, has there been any movement to actually hear the tapes? Has anyone asked for the tapes themselves?
Well, that's why I'm glad we have a prosecutor on set with us today, because that's something I hadn't thought of, that is even better. And to the degree I have gotten to know the way that Donald Trump operates, both as a candidate and as a president, I do know this. He loves the telephone. He uses the telephone as a way of taking the measure of the person he's talking to. And to the point that was just made, he raises and lowers his voice, moves in with intensity, backs off, all to take not just the measure of the moment, but the person who he's dealing with, and trying to figure out in intuitive ways and in maybe double-speak ways what he's driving at and what he may be able to expect in a reciprocal response. Those kinds of things would be much more evident, I believe, in a recording than a transcript. So the president did not say recording. He said transcript, declassified transcript, not a recording. But I think the point is incredibly well taken, that listening to it would be much better and more revealing and more clarifying than reading it.
Right. All right. So, Kira, another question I want to ask you, though, legally, is this question of withholding U.S. aid, which we found out happened about a week or so before this phone call took place. The president said it had nothing to do with anything other than the fact that he was uncomfortable with the U.S. alone giving the Ukraine so much aid and wanted more money to come from other parties, Europe or whatnot. At the end of the day, would his motivation for withholding that aid matter?
Well, this comes back to whether or not you want to look at this alleged conduct. It's all alleged, as Major says, and as I think we need to remember right now.
Yeah.
It's all alleged, but it comes back to whether you want to analyze it in political terms or in criminal terms. So if you analyze it in criminal terms, the state of mind does matter. Is there an innocent state of mind about whether or not you're simply wanting to prompt your allies to pony up more, or whether you're using it as a cudgel to have the Ukraine help you in your re-election effort? That state of mind would matter very much in a criminal case. In a political sense, is the president using the massive powers of the presidency to aid himself in a corrupt way? That is a different set of questions that I think the Congress would be investigating and the Senate would have to consider in an impeachment trial.
So if you were investigating this, there's just no way of finding out exactly what someone's state of mind is, correct?
Well, we don't have an MRI, a machine that can look into somebody's mind and tell us what they were thinking weeks or months ago. We don't have that. But prosecutors, meat and potatoes work day in and day out is listening to things if they exist, like the tape recording. If it exists, that will be very powerful evidence. You look at the circumstances, you look at the other communications, you talk to the people around the president. What was the advice? Did he accept it? Did he reject it? What were people's reactions? You can put together a case based on intent through circumstantial evidence. That's typically the way prosecutors do it.
So you can piece together an idea of what the intent probably was.
Yes.
Let's remind ourselves of something that happened in broad daylight and is part of, I have to acknowledge, another network's archive of news information regarding President Trump. ABC News was in the Oval Office in the person of George Stephanopoulos, and George Stephanopoulos stood right next to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, sitting at the Resolute desk, and asked him, point blank, if a foreign government offered you dirt on a political opponent, would you take it? Do we remember what the president said? He said yes, out loud, on camera. And he also said, I don't think there'd be anything wrong with it. Why wouldn't I take it? It's not like I would be doing anything wrong. If it was offered, I might take it. I just very well might.
So, Major...
Now, I'm not inventing that. That's what the President of the United States said. And I would say, in that context, you have to ask yourself, well, in this conversation, do those things matter? Are they contextual to either the president's desires, motives, or inklings? That happened in public not too long ago.
Right. So he wasn't
I'm
lying.
just saying.
He wasn't lying there, it appears. All right. Well, Major Garrett and Keir Dugal, thanks to both of you so much.
You got it.
Thank you.
Earlier today, the president was asked about Pelosi's support for an impeachment inquiry. Let's listen to what he said.
Look, it's just a continuation of the witch hunt. It's the worst witch hunt in political history. We have the strongest economy we've ever had. We have the best unemployment numbers we've ever had. African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, lowest in history. Best numbers we've ever had. Our country is doing phenomenally well. We have rebuilt our military to the tune of $2.5 trillion. We have the strongest military on earth. If you look at the vets, if you look at any group, they're doing fantastically well. So the country's doing the best it's ever done, and I just heard that she'd like to impeach. We also just got Rasmussen, as you heard, just came out with a poll. We're at 53, and they say 53 plus maybe 10. A lot of people say that because you add about 10% to the Trump polls, because some people don't want to talk, they just want to go out and do it, and they know what's good. Our country's doing the best it's ever done. They're going to lose the election, and they figure this is a thing to do. This never happened where we're in the election. And, I mean, if she does that, they all say that's a positive for me from the election. You could also say, who needs it? It's bad for the country. Then they wonder why they don't get gun legislation done. Then they wonder why they don't get drug prices lowered, because all they do is talk nonsense. No more infrastructure bills, no more anything. All they do, that's all they do. You watch Jerry Nadler and Schiff. You know, Schiff has been. It's the craziest thing anybody. And other countries, like with Iraq, and we were with other countries during the day, and every one of them says how crazy it is. We have the strongest country in the world, the best economy we've ever had, and she's talking impeachment. So I think that, and by the way, she hasn't even seen the phone call. The phone call was perfect. The call that wasn't perfect and the words that weren't perfect were Joe Biden with respect to his son. And his son takes away millions of dollars out of Ukraine and millions of dollars out of China. And you don't talk about that. It's a real disgrace. But the good news is the voters get it. This is why they say it's good for the election. But you know what? It's bad for the country. What she's doing is very bad. If it's true, I can't even believe it. It's true. How can you do this and you haven't even seen the phone call? The whistleblower, they say, was second hand or third hand. And it was reported, though I have no idea who the whistleblower is. I guess I could find out. Maybe I couldn't find out. But they say it was a very partisan person, the whistleblower. But it was second or third hand. Never heard the call. But I have better than that. We have the whole transcript of the call, which will be released tomorrow, and comments will be put with respect. It was a perfect call. There was no quid pro quo, unlike Biden. There was no nothing. It was a perfect call, a very nice call. And in fact, I thought this was very nice. Ukraine just came out and made a very good statement. It was a very good call. There was no pressure put on them whatsoever. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Former Vice President Joe Biden responded to the controversy in Delaware today, saying President Trump should be impeached if he does not comply with requests from Congress about his call with the president of Ukraine. Let's listen.
The president should stop stonewalling this investigation and all the other investigations into his alleged wrongdoing. Using its full constitutional authority, Congress, in my view, should demand the information it has a legal right to receive. If the Congress does not, if the president does not comply with such a request from the Congress, if he continues to obstruct Congress and flout the law, Donald Trump will leave Congress, in my view, no choice but to initiate impeachment. That would be a tragedy, but a tragedy of his own making.
And joining me now are Caitlin Huey-Burns and Bo Erickson. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Bo is a CBS News campaign embed covering the Biden campaign. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Bo, let me start with you. This is essentially the same position Biden took over the weekend, that impeachment should be the path forward only if the Trump administration continues to stonewall Congress. Do you have any sense why Biden didn't follow the lead of many House Democrats and call for impeachment to move forward?
Well, yes, the Biden press corps rushed to Delaware today for the statement on impeachment and what we may hear from Mr. Biden. But it sounds like Mr. Biden is playing the long view here. He said the similar thing on Saturday, but then also our political unit has noted, Ellie Watson and Aaron Navarro, that he has been saying something similar going back to May, actually. And I just was kind of figuring out what are the goalposts here for Joe Biden. So I actually went to go look at the congressional record back from February 1999 when there was an impeachment trial of President Bill Clinton. And at the time, then Senator Joe Biden said, "We must find that the president has violated federal crime statutes, not just that he did bad things." And then another goalpost also that Joe Biden had at the time was, "It is very important for both history's sake and for fairness' sake that we keep our eye on the ball."
Right.
So it seems like Joe Biden here in 2019 is keeping his eye on the ball, which is the election possibly.
So, Bo, is Biden, though, in a peculiar situation because he's also somewhat involved in this controversy, as he was the subject that the president was pursuing with the president of Ukraine? Does he run the risk of, if he complains about it too much, he looks like he may be guilty?
Well, peculiar is one word for it, definitely. The Biden campaign has taken every opportunity to say that this is politics at play. Joe Biden has also said last weekend that he could beat Donald Trump like a drum. And so every time we hear Trump talk about the connections from Ukraine and the Bidens, the press corps and potential voters out there should think politics. It is a sticky situation only for Republicans, the Biden campaign says.
Interesting. All right. So, Caitlin, I want to turn to some of the other candidates in this race, Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro. They've been calling for impeachment for a while now, and it sort of seems like others are now getting on their bandwagon. As this moves forward, does this give them an advantage in the 2020 race?
Well, Elizabeth Warren was really one of the first to come out and say, after the Mueller report, I've read the report, I believe that Congress should move forward with impeachment proceedings. At the time, that was a kind of a risky move, considering that lots of Democrats weren't there yet. And Nancy Pelosi was busy trying to kind of keep her caucus in order, with some members wanting to move forward, other members who helped make up the majority in Congress for more moderate or Republican-leaning districts weren't there yet. So we've certainly seen a shift in ground here with this call being the determining factor for some people. So you have several Democratic candidates calling for impeachment proceedings to begin. Bernie Sanders is one that changed his position a little bit, wasn't ready to go quite there yet today, saying that impeachment proceedings should begin.
We have that sound, actually. Let's listen.
I'm a United States Senator, and in that case, my job is to act as part of a jury to determine whether the president is guilty or not. Now, as I have just told you, I believe, based on what I have read and what I know, is that there are impeachable offenses, okay? But that's what the House process is about. So you're asking me to tell you how I'm going to vote before I hear the evidence coming before the Senate, and that would be irresponsible. So I've told you what I think, but maybe I'm old-fashioned. I like to hear the evidence before I make a decision.
So, Sanders is one of several senators in this race. Does that complicate the situation at all?
Well, it's interesting because several senators are running for president, and in some ways that has given them some political cover, right? Because they don't have to make the first move in the House. On the other hand, it does create some complications for some of them because they are ultimately going to be dealing with these issues. We have seen today that Republicans aren't budging on this. In fact, they seem to be on the president's side so far. Could that change considering how this goes? We really don't know how this will shape out. But it is notable that when we're on the campaign trail, we're talking to a lot of voters. I'm sure Bo does the same. And this is an issue that doesn't really come up for people. They are ready to litigate this at the ballot box. They're ready to vote in 2020.
Might it change, though, after this?
So this is what I'm wondering. I'm wondering when we're talking to voters how familiar they are with this, because this is different, of course, from the Russia investigation. We saw that the Russia investigation had kind of fallen off the radar for a lot of folks. Instead, they were really focused on healthcare, the economy, climate change, guns, our top issues. So does this start to change among the base? But what I mean by that is that this isn't something that these lawmakers have come to because they're getting this strong push from voters.
Right.
This is something that a lot of the senators have talked about, that they believe that no matter what happens, that they believe this is the step they have to take.
Do you think, though, it will certainly force the hand of all the candidates at this point to come down one way or another?
Well, I think that's what was notable about Biden making this public appearance today. Bo pointed out rightly that he is saying essentially what he said over the weekend, but the fact that it was in this kind of setting, that he called reporters to Wilmington, that he did this on camera, but not quite going as far as some of his other contenders, I think shows kind of where we are here, that there was this feeling to address it.
Right. And Bo, you have been speaking to people in and around the Biden team. Do they see this all as helpful or harmful to his campaign?
Well, yes, it is politics, according to them, what President Trump and his allies are doing, connecting Bidens to Ukraine. But, hey, this is politics for the Biden campaign as well. I spoke with two longtime fundraisers for Mr. Biden, and they said in the long run, the long game, looking into the primary, that this may actually help Biden make that case that it is Biden v. Trump, that electability argument we keep hearing. And we also see this from from the campaign as well. The Biden campaign has sent at least 3 fundraising emails just since Saturday about this topic, and I asked a senior Biden official, why are they doing this? And they said, well, it's pretty obvious. We are under attack, and we need our supporters to show up and defend us, and the way that they can do that, I guess, is with their money.
All right. So, though, Caitlin, what does this whole situation tell you when we take a step back of how the eventual Democratic nominee will have to deal with Trump?
Right. I mean, this is pretty remarkable on a lot of different fronts, but it does give us a preview of what to expect next year. The president has shown that he has a big appetite for going after his opponents and doing it in a way that is unconventional, potentially illegal. So a lot of the things that he has been saying, he has nicknames for all of his candidates, all of his potential challengers. He likes to muddy the waters. It's become kind of a strategy from his team to put things out there. And this is what we hear from voters all the time, is when they're assessing these candidates, they're really imagining them on the debate stage or on some kind of national stage with Donald Trump.
And he's very good at deflecting his questionable behavior onto others.
Right, and these voters really are aware of that. I mean, we know they put defeating Donald Trump as their priority, but they do try to imagine whoever they want to pick as kind of going toe-to-toe with Trump. And we hear from a lot of voters that they want someone who can really take him on. So that is something that the Biden campaign was trying to show today as well. Not acknowledging any of the underlying issues, but really trying to take this back.
Well, I do want to read a statement from Brad Parscale, the Trump 2020 campaign manager. It just came out in response to all of this. It says, Democrats can't beat President Trump on his policies or his stellar record of accomplishments, so they're trying to turn a Joe Biden scandal into a Trump problem. The misguided Democrat impeachment strategy is meant to appease their rabid, extreme leftist base, but will only serve to embolden and energize President Trump's supporters and create a landslide victory for the president. What are the chances that that is true? What are the chances, Caitlin, that this will just energize the base?
Well, the president has been trying to figure out ways to not only keep his base intact, but expand it. And that's very hard to do because his approval ratings are very low nationally. But this seems geared towards not only revving up his base and making sure they're still engaged, but also trying to maybe talk to more independent-minded voters who don't want to spend perhaps the next year kind of watching an even more divided Washington go through this process. And so this might be a way that the campaign is hoping to reach out. But it is notable, though, that they do muddy the waters. They do put these allegations out there without the backup. And it does certainly could have an effect. Now, does this energize the Democrats to a larger extent? Does it turn some independents off? These are all questions that we'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely. Well, Caitlin Huey Burns and Bo Erickson, thanks to both of you. And we'll be right back with more reaction from Capitol Hill. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Good morning to you and welcome to CBS This Morning.
Understanding the world.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
Begins with the right questions.
Have police discovered a motive? Does the president have a red line here?
What can voters expect to see today?
Join Gayle King, Anthony Mason, and Tony DeCopel on CBS This Morning.
We know a little more this morning. This is a major development.
This is a very serious situation.
More news every morning on the show everyone is talking about.
We have much more news ahead for you.
CBS This Morning.
The president's response to news of an impeachment inquiry can be summed up with these two words, quote, presidential harassment. Joining me now is CBS News' Nicole Killian at the White House. Hi, Nicole. So we've seen the president call this a witch hunt, just like he did for the Mueller investigation. Is this a taste of what we'll be hearing from the White House?
Absolutely. I mean, you've seen the president come out not only with that presidential harassment tweet, but also, again, calling this a total witch hunt and breaking news witch hunt garbage. So pick a nasty phrase, any nasty phrase, and the president is certainly throwing it out. But look, the administration, too, feels that this is just, more political stunts from the Democrats. We've been talking to a number of senior administration officials who tell us that nobody is really panicking over this and really that they feel that they can make all of this work to their advantage and that ultimately they're betting that this is going to cost Democrats politically.
So, Nicole, it sounds like you're saying the White House is not worried about an impeachment inquiry's impact on 2020. If anything, they think it might have a favorable impact.
Yeah, well, we're already seeing, I know you read the campaign statement that the Trump campaign put out a short time ago. Also, the campaign manager, Brad Parscale, doubling down in a tweet a short time ago saying that Democrats are more or less paving the way for a real Donald Trump landslide victory. So that should give you a sense of where they feel, the momentum is, that it will be on their side, that they can use this to galvanize the president's supporters.
And Nicole, what do we know about the president's decision to release the transcript of his call with the leader of Ukraine?
Well, since Sunday, he's kind of been putting that out there that it's possible he would release this call, even though in the run-up to his announcement this afternoon that he will, in fact, allow a transcript of this call to be released. He kind of hedged back and forth on it, but we have consistently heard him say, hey, when you look at this call, it's going to show that everything was fine, everything that was good. One thing I do want to note, in picking up on some points that were raised in an earlier conversation with Major Garrett, was this question about whether or not there is a recording of this call, and we know that the president hasn't gone that far yet. Now, I was here at the White House on Sunday when the president first acknowledged that he, brought up Joe Biden in his conversation with Ukraine's leader. And at the time, I asked specifically if he felt that someone was spying on him. That was something he had put out there in a tweet over the weekend. And he responded by saying, that when he has these calls with foreign leaders, and speaks to the head of another country, that he has to be able to speak to those people, and those people don't want to know that they're being recorded or that you have a stenographer. Another reporter pressed him and asked specifically if there was a recording of this call, and he didn't respond directly, but he again kind of reiterated those same talking points, saying that he assumes that there are many people on the line, that sometimes they do tape these calls, and sometimes there is a stenographer, and on the other side there may be the same as well. So that is certainly something worth, I think, looking into, but at minimum we know that the president has allowed for the release of a transcript of this call.
And we are expected to receive it tomorrow, is that right?
That's correct.
And will there be any context?
Well, we're still waiting to get more information from the White House from that standpoint. I certainly have been pressing for the better part of this afternoon to find out how this is going to be released. But so far, we have not been given a lot of details about, how this will be rolled out beyond what the president tweeted earlier today, that he is calling for a fully declassified transcript that is unredacted.
Now, is the White House expecting calls for the whistleblower's complaint to dry up with the release of this transcript? Because that's certainly not going to happen, correct?
Well, look, the administration, of course, has not been forthcoming on this whistleblower complaint as of yet. We certainly know that there has been a lot of pressure, more specifically on the acting director of national intelligence, to turn this over by Thursday when he is expected to testify before Congress. So, again, that's one where we'll just have to wait and see.
All right. Well, Nicole Killian at the White House, we thank you. We'll have more on how Democrats are navigating impeachment after a break. You're streaming Red and Blue.
The future of our democracy is at stake. There comes a time when you have to be moved by the spirit of history to take action to protect and preserve the integrity of our nation. I truly believe, the time to begin impeachment proceedings against this president has come.
That was Democratic Congressman John Lewis earlier today announcing his support of launching an impeachment inquiry into President Trump. The Georgia lawmaker had been cautious about supporting proceedings for months. Antoine Seawright is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. He joins me now from Washington. We also have Siobhan Hughes. She's a Capitol Hill reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Welcome, Antoine and Siobhan. Antoine, let me start with you. This is the day dozens of House Democrats have been waiting for. So what does this impeachment inquiry mean now for the party as a whole?
Well, it just means that we are want to find out more information and continue gathering the facts before we move forward. I applaud Speaker Pelosi. I applaud House leadership for, as we say in South Carolina, cooking before we eat or crawling before we walk. You cannot launch a full-fledged impeachment without gathering the facts. I think they would do this under this next step, and I think it's the right thing to do. Look, this is a matter of national security, and this is also a matter of stopping a dangerous precedent that Donald Trump wants to set by asking foreign leaders to dig up dirt on U.S. political opponents. He got away with that before, and I think the House Democrats are saying no, not anymore.
All right, so Siobhan, how does this impeachment probe affect more vulnerable Republicans in the House and the Senate?
You may be referring to some of the more vulnerable Democrats, and that is one of the open questions. You will notice that in directing 6 committees to operate under the auspices of an impeachment inquiry, there is going to be no formal House vote on the matter. So even in taking this momentous step, even in using the impeachment word, Mrs. Pelosi is for now protecting her vulnerable Democrats from having to take a vote on this.
And Siobhan, you report that for weeks lawmakers on both sides of the aisle struggled to get answers on why the president delayed sending appropriated money to help Ukraine. What more can you tell us about what you learned?
Well, for a long time, there were shifting responses on what the president's rationale was. Was it because he didn't want to send foreign aid at a time when he felt Europe needed to be doing more? Was it because of this label of corruption? And now the thing that everybody has reported all week that has landed like a lightning bolt on Capitol Hill, Mr. Trump acknowledging that he did bring up Joe Biden in a conversation with the Ukrainian president. In other words, the fear, the thought among Democrats is that this was a pressure campaign by Mr. Trump, who had an implicit threat of withholding these hundreds of millions of dollars if the Ukrainian president did not find something on Joe Biden.
Antoine, you want to respond, I can tell.
Yeah, there are several things we should all look at very closely through all this. One, this is still continuing to gather information by the committee chairs, which means the work of the full-blown Democratic Congress will continue. So I think they will still continue with their for the people for the people legislative work, because we can investigate and legislate. Number two, the words inquiry are so important and they're so different from full-blown impeachment. That's number two. And number three, for Republicans who do not want to support gathering intel and information, think about this. If this was Barack Hussein Obama and having this conversation that we're having now in this moment, Republicans would have already impeached him. And so I think, again, when you think about country first, when you think about doing the right thing in the name of transparency, I think House Democrats did the right thing.
And you bring up a very good point. This is an impeachment inquiry. This is a very, very long process. This is not something that happens.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
And I think that's so important for, as we, particularly those of us in the media, having conversations, that we do not conflate the two, because the general public may not understand the difference between the two. No, Donald Trump will not be removed from office because Nancy Pelosi gave his speech. That's what I've read and heard from so many people online and text messages. What this means is this will be a continue of gathering information, flushing out the facts, but really holding some people in this administration accountable for their corruption.
But Siobhan, I want to ask you, because at the end of the day, this comes down to a political calculus, and this comes down to what lawmakers will vote for. So the numbers simply aren't there for impeachment, barring something radical that will, change the minds of half of the Republican Party. So, Siobhan, what do you see as the likely outcome of all of this?
So at this point, that seems right to me. I don't see the Democrats as having the numbers to recommend impeachment of President Trump. But it has become a political imperative, and there is a sense among a very large chunk of the Democratic Party that they need to take action. If they don't take action, what is the purpose of them holding these prestigious and lauded jobs? What message does it send to the country that they watch a big president engage in conduct they think is abhorrent, oppositional to the Constitution, and they don't do anything?
But can I make one point to that? Again, that's why it's so important for Democrats in the House to continue legislating while they investigate. You have to do both things. I always say it takes two to make the thing go right. You have to do both to make certain that the people's business, the thing that Democrats were elected to do in 2018, in a real way, that work continues on as the committees do their investigative work.
Right. But I think, what both of you are saying is that regardless of outcome, it seems that enough Democrats now feel that they need to take this step, regardless of where it leads, simply because they believe that is part of the job description at this point. This is what they believe. Antoine, what did you make of Biden's response today, and does this hurt or help him?
Oh, I think this strengthens him, and I think it's a valuable lesson, not just for people running against Joe Biden in the presidential primary, but for Republicans too. When you come after Joe Biden, it usually backfires. We've seen that on the presidential side. We've seen candidates slip down in the polls and some slip out of the conversation, and now we're seeing that as it relates to Donald Trump. So I think this strengthens him. I also think his response was very measured. He did not call for full-fledged impeachment. The one thing about Joe Biden, I think his experience has taught him to be measured in certain scenarios, and I think we saw that in his response. He called on Congress to do the necessary work so you can have the evidence. But I also want to praise Nancy Pelosi, because the one thing, she's been very measured in her response, and Nancy Pelosi is one of the best counters D.C. has ever seen before, and I don't think she would have gone down this road without thinking about the number 218 and keeping this caucus together and keeping her in a position to keep the majority.
Siobhan, looking ahead to 2020, do you think that this is bolstering both President Trump and potential Democratic candidate Joe Biden as foils for each other?
Yes, and yes, it absolutely elevates the focus on both men. Wherever Joe Biden has been in the polls, and even though he has been at the front, it's maybe not always, this certainly elevates his profile as it does Donald Trump's.
So this is nothing but good news for both of them is one way of looking at it. Antoine, would you agree?
Yes, because it's going to galvanize both of their bases to Donald Trump supporters. It's going to galvanize and encourage them to go even harder and deeper for Donald Trump. For Joe Biden, and even some who have been on the fence or not necessarily pro-Joe Biden, I think they see this as Donald Trump is coming after Joe Biden because he's afraid of what a Joe Biden nomination could do. So I think it's going to strengthen that and bring some people to the Biden conversation. But it's also going to help the Congress effort in maintaining the most diverse Congress in this nation's history, because the one thing people will not be able to say is Democrats have not done their oversight job that they are constitutionally asked to do.
Antoine, sorry, I have to cut you off because Republicans are now responding to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's announcement. Let's listen in.
But she does not speak for America when it comes to this issue. She cannot decide unilaterally what happens here. They have been investigating this president before he even got elected. They have voted 3 times on impeachment on this floor. Twice they voted before one word of the Mueller report came back. Our job here is a serious job. Our job is to focus on the American public. Our job is to make tomorrow better than today. Our job is to legislate, not to continue to investigate something in the back when you cannot find any reason to impeach this president. This election is over. I realize 2016 did not turn out the way Speaker Pelosi wanted it to happen, but she cannot change the laws of this Congress. She cannot unilaterally decide we're in an impeachment inquiry. What she said today made no difference of what's been going on. It's no different than what Nadler's been trying to do. It's time to put the public before politics. Thank you.
Mr. McCarthy, are you afraid that you're on the wrong side?
A very quick response there by Representative Kevin McCarthy with the Republican response to Speaker Nancy Pelosi. He said the Democrats have been trying since 2016 to get this president out of office, and what Speaker Pelosi said today is no different than what's been going on before. Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. The decision to launch an inquiry comes after months of caution by Pelosi. She said a whistleblower complaint about President Trump became the tipping point.
This week, the president has admitted to asking the president of Ukraine to take actions which would benefit him politically. The actions of the Trump presidency revealed the dishonorable fact of the president's betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry.
The president's call coincided with a delay in military aid to Ukraine. Mr. Trump says the funds were withheld because he wanted other nations to contribute to Ukraine. Today, he denied claims that it was done to pressure Ukraine to investigate the Biden family.
That call was perfect. It couldn't have been nicer. And even the Ukrainian government put out a statement that that was a perfect call. There was no pressure put on them whatsoever. But there was pressure put on with respect to Joe Biden. What Joe Biden did for his son, that's something they should be looking at.
In her announcement today, Pelosi was referring to a whistleblower complaint that brought intense scrutiny to a call the president made with his Ukrainian counterpart. It involves concerns that Mr. Trump may have made an improper promise during that conversation. We will soon know more about what was said because the president says he'll release the transcript. Mr. Trump is accusing the former vice president of improperly assisting his son, Hunter Biden. He used to work on the board of a Ukrainian gas company. No evidence has surfaced to support Mr. Trump's claims. The transcript of the call is expected to be released as early as tomorrow. It is the same day Mr. Trump will meet with the Ukrainian president at the United Nations. The acting director of national intelligence is expected to testify Thursday about that whistleblower complaint. The House Intelligence Committee chairman says he could bring the whistleblower directly to Capitol Hill as soon as this week. Major, let me start with you. Now that we know that there will be a formal impeachment inquiry, can you lay out for us exactly how the impeachment process works?
Well, as Speaker Pelosi just said, the 6 committees already investigating matters that they believe might constitute high crimes and misdemeanors. Remember, that's the constitutional standard for impeachment. Will continue their work under the umbrella of an impeachment inquiry. Now, if Congress decides to actually have a vote to place that official umbrella term legislatively over those 6 committees, that will invest the House majority with more